Hey, my name is Joe Lasley, and I'm going to be talking about holding environments and their importance for leadership. So the idea of a holding environment is talked about by a psychologist named Donald Winnicott. And he referred to this as not just a physical environment, but also a psychological and emotional environment that we experience as individuals in relationship with others. That there's a space between who I am and my interactions with other people or the environment around me that constitutes my environment, psychologically speaking. And this environment can have different qualities. And Winnicott characterized holding as the experience that we have in this environment that can be good enough. And he emphasized good enough as in it needs to be a balance of soothing us so that we are comfortable and safe, and also challenging us to adapt to our environment so that we can succeed socially. And so the idea that we don't need too much soothing, but we also need enough holding in order to be able to be ourselves, to grow and develop. This is somewhat related to an idea on a group psychology level from a psychologist named Bion, who talked about the group container. And this is the idea that groups as a whole have their own psychological container, which holds the emotional life of the group. The difference between a holding environment and a group container is that group containers are not necessarily good enough. They sometimes simply exist. And so it is more of a challenge than to make a container that allows individuals to experience a holding environment while they're with the group. And another important point from Bion is that no individual can ever be considered outside of a group. We're always, whether we're like actively participating in a group discussion, members of some group or many groups likely in society. And so we're always influenced unconsciously by those containers in that group psychology. In terms of development, this is also related to what a psychologist named Vygotsky talked about with the zone of proximal development, that there's your comfort zone, which is things that you can already do comfortably on your own. And there are these things that you can do with help from another person that challenge you to adapt and change or grow. And that lies between your comfort zone and things that you can't do or that are unsafe or too challenging. And throwing the idea of group psychology in here and holding environments, a group of individuals can provide a developmental space, a psychological space to help an individual grow and to enter that zone of proximal development. And we do this by creating a group container that can actually provide a good enough environment for an individual to grow and develop. So what is a good enough environment, and how do we adapt to our environment? Well, for me personally, I study a lot of role playing, and the idea that we play roles and take on different roles in society is not that different from when we are playing role play, whether we're kids or adults in a game or in life as parents or at work or at school, those types of things. And this diagram shows how role playing is psychologically constructed, where we have ourself and our primary identity, but we also have the character that we're playing or the role that we're taking, or our persona that we're taking on in any particular situation. And there are things between ourselves and our personas that bleed back and forth. Sometimes I identify with aspects of my persona, and sometimes aspects of my true self are able to be expressed through my persona. And this is all the boundary of what is safe to show to other people in the characters and roles that I play is based on the social contract and building up that relationship with other people. The facts are that personas do protect us, and so they're necessary to not always be just our vulnerable true self. It could be very exposed. But they also allow us to be socially successful and to adapt. I can't always just share everything that's on my mind very bluntly without consideration for any impact it will have on others or expectations that exist as a group. And so they're important as long as they don't suffocate our true self too much. And this is where leadership comes in, because we might have a leadership role that we need to play, a group context, an environment that we're in, or maybe even that we're impacting. And we have our internal reality, who our true self is. And in between all of that is our persona. And in order to develop into our leadership role, we need to learn how to create our persona that will meet both the needs of our true self, our internal self, and the leadership role in the groups that we're a part of, and how to manage all that entails. And it's in holding environments that are good enough, where we're able to experiment with different ways of being in the world, with who we are as ourself, to learn more about our true self, and also to learn more about our persona and how we show up and how other people show up. And so there's this interpersonal aspect, which goes back to the original idea of holding, that is the space between two people that creates that psychological environment. And so if we overlay the role-playing psychology here, you have your internal ideas of yourself, your personas, the roles that you're taking on, and then you encounter another person who has their own perception of the role that you're taking on in their persona based on what you're giving them, and maybe of your true self that may be unconscious that you're giving them or that you're withholding. And so this interpersonal dynamic of the roles that we take and how we learn to create our personas or constantly adapt our personas to the people we're with and the different environments that we're in is essential for taking on leadership roles and learning to do that as leaders, and to create environments and relationships with people that are good enough, that are challenging and soothing for people to be able to grow and develop. And all of this happens within the context of the group and a group psychology. And so to think of the group container as this unconscious element that is underlying and containing all of these spaces and interactions that we're having kind of fulfills this metaphor here in this image. You have this bowl that is the group container, which is created in any group that exists and is largely unconscious. But then we have our personas, and we are constantly being influenced unconsciously by the groups we're part of and the larger systems, but also by the interactions between people in that group, and whether or not we experience that psychological space as good enough to move into that zone of proximal development, and can we hold each other in that process.